Hi everybody, welcome to UTech. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to build a failover cluster or a MSCS cluster. For this lab you will need 3 servers, node 1, node 2 and a storage server. In this video I'm only going to show you how to build a failover cluster, but in the next video I'll show you how to build a Windows 2008 R2 storage server for all your hard drives. Okay, so first of all we'll log into my node 1. If you look at this, it's a lab underscore node underscore 01. The IP is 192.168.1.50. For this lab, each server is gonna have 2 NICs. If I showed you NIC 1 is front end, that's my internet connection, and the other one is my cluster. Same goes for my .50 NIC 2. If you look here, it said lab underscore node underscore 02. And if I show you the network on this, it's gonna have 2 NICs. So my FE2, this is my front end NIC, and then my cluster 2, which is for my MSCS failover cluster. Okay, so let's go to node 1 first. You will need to go to Service Manager, Features, Add Features, Failover Cluster, and you go Next and Install. We'll do the same thing for node 2. Server Manager, Add Features, Failover Server, Failover Cluster, sorry. Next and Install. So while this is installing, just a little tip, this is already done, so I just go close, and then if I go to Administrator Tool, Failover Cluster Manager, just a tip, you have to have one failover cluster role installed in all the nodes. Any server you want to make part of a cluster, the services have to be running on this. So let me just check on my node 2. Node 2 is done also, so I'll close this also and go back to my node 1 because that's going to be my primary cluster. So if I open failover cluster manager, so you right click on this and you go create a cluster. Alright, this basically just tells you how a cluster works and how high availability data would be working. So I just go do not show this page again. Okay, so here I need to get all the servers that's going to be on the cluster. So let's go node, and then I can just go check, and then node 1 and node 2, and then just go OK, and then it's going to try checking if can you use it. So this is good. Just a little tip on this is, if you're using VMware and then say you have node 1 and then you try cloning the node 1 and then changing it to node 2, it's not gonna work like that. So you need to create individual machines. So I just go next. Okay, for here is really important, you need to know it. Okay, so basically this is telling you that do you want to run tests on before you create a cluster, which is going to check all the IP, if there's available hard drive and enough memory available. It usually takes 10 to 15 minutes, but we're not going to do that because I already checked if I have enough space and everything. So I go no and then go next. Okay, so here I need to name the cluster, not the computer but the cluster service. So I'll call a lab cl underscore cluster 01. Okay, so remember I told you my node 1 and node 2 have 2 NICs. One is going to be my front end, which is 192, and one is my cluster, which is 10 dot. So I'm going to be configuring both of the NICs on both node 1 and node 2, so they're high availability. So in case one NIC goes offline, the service will pick the other NIC up and will keep the high availability data online. So for this one I'm just gonna go .3, this doesn't matter, and then for this one I'm going to go 80, and then I go next, Okay, so it's saying that this is just information saying lab underscore cluster 1 is going to be my name, and then node 1 and node 2 dot home.net is, if home.net is my domain controller. If you watch my other videos, that's where we created it. And then I have two IP addresses for my cluster NIC, which is .3, and then my front end, which is going to the internet, is .80. So that's good. So just go next. Now it's actually configuring the cluster information, so this usually takes a minute or two. And then one more tip, in order to use failover cluster, you have to have the same operating system. So you could have multiple servers that's running 2008 R2, that should work, but you can't have one 2003 server and one 2008. It doesn't work like that. You have to have the same OS running on both nodes, or how many nodes you want. You can have 2 nodes, it's the basic, because it won't work with one node because it won't have any place to fail over. So 2 node to 10 nodes, so 20, doesn't matter how many nodes, but they all have to be the same operating system. So it's waiting for core cluster group to come online, so just getting all the security policies, everything, setting everything up. For this server, this is a 2008 R2 with the i7 950. I'm just giving it 3 gigs, and it's a 64-bit operating system. And then you have to have this on a domain. You can't do it as a work group. So this has all your nodes and all your storage servers you have to be part of a domain. They don't work as standalone servers. So there you go, it said create a cluster, so everything is good. Usually if you get a red X right here, that means there's something wrong. That's one of the X is for, say, like I told you before, if you have node 1 in VMware and then you try, or any VMware or Hyper-V or VirtualBox, and you try cloning that, that's not gonna work. So you can't clone any of the nodes. Each node has to be created separately. So then you go finish. So there you go. So now if I go to no application, there's no application started, but I'll show you how to set up high availability, because right now you just have the basic cluster set up. You have 2 nodes and they both have their services running on it, but now there's no actual high availability data set right now, but I'll show you that later. So if I go to node, I have node 1 and 2. These arrows right here are showing that both of the nodes are up, so both of the machines are online. If I go to storage, so it's saying that, okay, so this is kind of weird. I have 3 disks for this, but disk 2 is actually being dedicated to disk witness file, which is a cluster file. So I accidentally used a 200 gig file. You only need like a separate. I could have just cut the 200 gig into 2 partitions. One could be like 1 gig, and I could use the file for that and then have the rest space. But for this should be fine. And then if I go down here, say availability storage, available storage, saying these 2 disks are available. So if I go to network, and then I scroll down, if I go to network 1, and I show you, see, both of my .1 is my IP address for my cluster 1 for my node 1, and cluster 2 is my IP address for node 1. So both of these, my cluster are high availability. So if one fail over, or one of the NIC goes bad or whatever, the data is still gonna be, it won't affect any data. If I go to my network 2, and I'll show you this is my front end for my cluster 1, and then front end for my cluster 2, or node 2 and node 1, and then the IP is 50. So if my front end, which is going to connect to my network outside of my internal network, this actually, so if one of them goes offline, the other data is gonna still stay here. So if you go to cluster event, this is actually, if you make any changes or anything like that, this actually gonna show you what you did. Alright, so now we're gonna set up just a standard application. So you're gonna go to your services and application, and you go to configure a service or application. So you go do not show this. This is the same thing. It's gonna tell you that you're gonna create an application on the clusters. Okay, so these are the default setup. Microsoft gives you with the cluster. So DFS, distribution file system. So basically this is like this also works like a cluster, but I'll show you how to build that DFS servers on a different video. This is really easy. So if you have a DHCP server and you want that server to be cluster, so if one of your DHCP server goes offline, you still have all the applications are running. And then if you have a file server, you can use a file server. There's just multiple things you could do. Other servers, print server, remote VM. So if you're using Hyper-V and you have 10 VMs, and then you could set up a cluster just on the VM. So if one of the server goes offline, the other VM will kick in, and then same goes for Win and then other servers. For this one, we're just gonna use general application or general service. I'm sorry, a genetic service. Next. Okay, so here it's gonna ask me what application do I want to cluster. I could use IP helper, IPsec policy. There's so much stuff here. I could use a volume disk, volume shadow, Windows audio, event firewall, just a bunch of stuff I could set up. For this, I'm just gonna use window time, just for example. Then I'll go next. Okay, so this is going to create this basically you have, let's say what do you want to name that application you're going to cluster. The window time, that's the service that's running, but this is also going to create a cluster for that one application. So we're just going to leave it as this just lab cluster as general service, and then here it's going to say, okay, so we need IP addresses for that one, not for your cluster, just for the application. So we're going to go .5, and then here we're gonna go .81. You really don't need 2 NICs to do that. You could just do everything with 1 NIC, but this way you have another NIC in case your NIC goes bad. So I'll show you at once. We'll failover. I'll show you how to failover cluster and see if it's actually working and everything. So once you get these done, I'll just go next. Okay, now remember I showed you in storage that I had 2 disks available. So now it's asking me which disk do I want to dedicate to that cluster, to the application. I could go both disks if I want. That way, if one disk goes offline, I'll still have the application running on the other disk. It'll fail over to the other disk. But I could just go one. It depends how important my data is, or how long I need. How long can I have the application down? If you can't have the application that has to be online, it could be a multi-million-dollar application, then you want to have multiple NICs. You can have up to 5. Depends how many disks you put on your storage server. So for this example, I'm just going to use just disk 1, just one of them. So you go next, and then here it said local hotkey. Basically, this is just saying do I want to add any services from my registry to run? Like, do I need any of my application from the registry in order for that service to start? Do I need any servers in registry to start? So for this, we're not going to do anything, but you could. Just going to go next. So basically, this is just the information saying that the servers I'm clustering is a Windows time, the Win